All right, hello there. We are going to look at this graph and determine its period and amplitude. I'm going to run out of here. So this graph is periodic, and the reason why you can tell it's periodic is because it repeats itself. So to determine, we're going to determine the period and the graph, the period and the amplitude of this graph. So let's start with period. The period is how long it takes until it starts repeating itself, or how long one cycle is. So you can really measure from any point to any point. That corresponds with one section to the other. In other words, I can measure, I noticed that it's like a series of U's, so I can measure from here to here if I want, this minimum point to this minimum point. If I counted, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So the period's 11. It took 11 units on the x-axis until it repeated itself. You can do any point to any point. If it's truly periodic, it won't matter. So if I decide, well, no, I'm going to measure from this top point to this top point, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So that's it. I can measure from this point to this point, but that's harder to tell. Regardless, my period is 11. So that's easy. And remember, that always is the x-axis. Amplitude, on the other hand, is the y-axis. So amplitude is easy to get confused because a lot of times you think it's the highest it gets. But that's only true if it's centered on the x-axis. This one is not. So amplitude is half the distance from the highest point to the lowest point of this graph, or of any graph that's periodic and has an amplitude. So for amplitude, let's move all this stuff away. You're going to measure from the top to the bottom and take half of that. Very simple. So the length from the top to the bottom, or vice versa, is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You take half of it. The amplitude of this graph is 7 over 2. And that's it with period and amplitude. Now, just a little extra bonus piece of information here. Only, obviously, periodic graphs have periods. So if it doesn't repeat itself, it's not going to have a period. But there are periodic graphs that do not have amplitudes. And those are the graphs that you can't measure the length from top to bottom. For example, our famous tangent graph is definitely periodic because it repeats itself over and over again, but you can't measure the length from the top to the bottom because it never ends. So the tangent graph would be an example of a periodic graph that does not have an amplitude. So that will be it for this video, and hope you enjoyed it. I did.